They say your world gets smaller as you age, but mine had shrunk to the size of a 12 by 12 guest bedroom that smelled aggressively of artificial lavender and hidden rot. I lay in the bed that my daughter-in-law, Jessica, claimed was ergonomic, designed for my comfort, but every time I shifted my weight, the memory foam hugged me like a coffin liner. It was too soft, too sinking, a mattress designed to keep an old man supine and silent. My hip surgery had been 2 months ago. By all medical standards, I should have been walking the perimeter of the backyard by now. I should have been pruning the hydrangeas I planted 30 years ago. I should have been feeling the sun on my face. Instead, I was imprisoned in a fog of induced lethargy, a prisoner in my own home, fed a diet of watery soup and crushed blue pills mixed into applesauce. "Open up, Dad," Jessica said, her voice bright and brittle like cheap glass. I looked at her. She stood over me, blocking the afternoon sun filtering through the blinds she always kept drawn. She was smiling, but it was a smile that stopped at her teeth. Her eyes were cold, calculating, scanning the room for anything out of place before landing on me with a look of mild disgust masked as care. "I'm not hungry, Jessica," I mumbled. My tongue felt thick, swollen, too big for my mouth. That was the pills. They made everything heavy. "You have to eat," she insisted, bringing the spoon to my lips with the persistence of a machine. "Dr. Evans said you need your strength, and you need your medicine. You've been agitated again." I hadn't been shouting. I had been dreaming of running, but I opened my mouth because fighting her took energy I didn't have. The spoon slid in, cold metal against my teeth. The taste was cloying, sweet, processed applesauce masking the bitter, metallic tang of the sedative. I swallowed it down, feeling the chemical leash tighten around my throat. My son, Daniel, stood in the doorway. He was a ghost in his own house, a man hollowed out by debt and a wife who wielded affection like a weapon. He looked at his feet, at the doorframe, at the ceiling, anywhere but at me. He was wearing the same shirt he had worn yesterday, stained at the cuff. He looked exhausted, but not from work. He looked exhausted from the weight of his own conscience. "He looks better today," Daniel mumbled, trying to convince himself. "Maybe we can help him to the chair later."
"Recovery takes time, Daniel," Jessica snapped without looking back at him. She scraped the bowl clean. "You know what the doctor said. Weight-bearing could ruin the graft. He stays in bed. For his own good." That was the mantra. That was the lock on the door. I felt my strength draining away, siphoned off by the very people sworn to protect me. The isolation was absolute. They had taken my phone the day I came home from the hospital, claiming I had lost it in the ambulance. They told the neighbors I was in a specialized rehab facility 2 towns over. In reality, I was right here, trapped in a suburban nightmare, listening to the muffled sounds of my own life being dismantled. Last week, I heard Jessica in the kitchen, her voice carrying through the vent, discussing the sale of my estate with a realtor. She spoke about my home, the home I built with my late wife, as if it were a carcass to be stripped for parts. She thought I was asleep. She thought I was gone. If you are listening to this, and you have ever handed over your autonomy to loved ones because you didn't want to be a burden, I beg you to reconsider. I wish someone had warned me that the hand feeding you the spoon is often the same hand reaching for your wallet. Don't make the mistake I did. Love your children, yes, but keep the keys to your kingdom in your own pocket. Trust, but verify. The turning point came on a Tuesday, when the air in the room felt stagnant and heavy. The regular home health nurse, a chatty woman who had once asked me about the photos on the dresser, had been fired by Jessica. I heard the argument downstairs. Jessica didn't like her asking why I was losing weight. The replacement arrived at 10 a.m. Her name was Elena. Elena was different. She was older, perhaps in her 60s, with gray hair pulled back to a severe bun and rough, capable hands that had seen too much of the world. She didn't have the fake, chirpy demeanor of the agency nurses. She walked into the room with a quiet gravity. Jessica hovered over her like a vulture, arms crossed, tapping her foot against the floorboards. She watched every move Elena made, her eyes narrowing if the nurse spent too long checking my pulse or looking into my eyes. "Just change the dressing," Jessica ordered. Elena didn't look at Jessica. She set her bag down and pulled on a pair of blue latex gloves. "I need to check the incision for infection, ma'am." Elena pulled back the sheet. I flinched, not from pain, but from shame.
I was a man who used to run a union of 5,000 steel workers.
I was a man who commanded respect. Now I was a withered thing in pajamas, exposed and helpless. But as Elena peeled back the gauze on my hip, her demeanor shifted. She leaned in close, ostensibly to inspect the stitches. Her body blocked Jessica's line of sight. Her hand lingered on my skin. It wasn't clinical. It was warm, human, and deliberate. I looked up at her. She made eye contact with me, intense, piercing eye contact that cut through the drug-induced haze clouding my brain. Her eyes were dark and urgent. She gave a barely perceptible shake of her head as she saw the bruising on my upper arm, the fingerprints where Jessica had grabbed me too hard yesterday when I tried to sit up. She knew. She applied the fresh bandage, her movements precise and quick. I felt the pressure of a pen cap, a distinct scratching sensation against the absorbent pad before she taped it down. It was subtle. If I hadn't been desperate for any sensation other than numbness, I might have missed it. When she finished, she squeezed my hand, hard. 3 distinct pulses. Squeeze, squeeze, squeeze. Safe, guard, watch. He's healing slowly, Elena told Jessica, standing up and stripping off her gloves. Her voice was flat, professional. The tissue was friable. He needs more protein. Friday is too late, Jessica snapped, checking her watch. We have appointments. Elena paused. She looked at Jessica, then she looked at me one last time. It was a look of desperate communication, a silent promise. Monday then, Elena said. She left. The door closed. The room fell silent again, save for the buzzing of a fly against the window pane. That night, the itching started. Not the itch of a healing wound, but the itch of curiosity burning under my skin. I waited. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, counting the minutes. I waited until the house was absolutely silent. I waited until the heavy thud of Daniel's footsteps retreated to the master bedroom down the hall, followed by the sound of the television turning on. I turned on the small bedside lamp. The light was dim, casting long, distorted shadows across the room. Carefully, painfully, I shifted my weight. I gritted my teeth against the sharp flare of agony in my hip. I pulled down the waistband of my pajamas. My fingers trembled as I found the edge of the medical tape. I peeled back the edge of the bandage, just enough to see the underside.
There, written in blue ballpoint pen on the white, sterile gauze, was a single word. Help. And below it, a tiny phone number. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that made me feel alive for the first time in months. Elena knew. She had seen the malnutrition. She had seen the fear radiating off me like a heat wave. She had recognized the prison for what it was. I stared at the number. It was a lifeline. But it was a lifeline I couldn't reach. I had no phone. Jessica had stripped the room of anything that could communicate with the outside world. But the message sparked a fire in my gut that burned away the fog of the sedatives. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't senile. I was a victim. And victims either die or they fight. For the next 3 days, I waged a silent war. When Jessica brought the medicine the next morning, crushed into the applesauce, I employed a trick I had learned from a documentary years ago. I coughed as the spoon entered my mouth, feigning a choking fit. While she turned to grab a napkin, disgusted by the mess, I used my tongue to push the bulk of the paste into my cheek. When she left the room, I spit the blue sludge into the soil of the potted ficus plant in the corner. The withdrawal was brutal. By Wednesday afternoon, the sweat started. My skin felt like it was crawling with ants. My hands shook so violently I had to hide them under the blanket when Daniel came in to check on me. Nausea rolled through me in waves, threatening to expose my deception. I clenched my jaw, breathing through the tremors, telling myself that every shiver was a sign that my mind was returning. And it did. The clarity returned like a sharp knife. I began to hear their conversations clearly. The muffled sounds through the vent became distinct words. I heard them in the hallway on Thursday evening. "The notary is coming Friday at noon," Jessica hissed. Her voice was tight, stressed. "We need him pliant, Daniel. We need him completely out of it but awake enough to hold a pen. If he doesn't sign the deed transfer, the bank takes our house. The foreclosure notice came today." "We have to think it's a medical release form, Jess," Daniel whispered. I could hear the fear in his voice, the weakness of a man who had never stood up for anything in his life. "What if he reads it, Jess?" "He won't read it," she replied, her voice dripping with contempt. "He can barely read the clock on the wall, Daniel. His brain is mush, thanks to me." I lay in the dark,
tears of rage leaking from my eyes. I realized then that Friday wasn't just a deadline, it was an execution of my legacy. They weren't just stealing my money, they were erasing my existence. Once the house was gone, I would be moved to a state facility, a forgotten file in a cabinet, while they drank champagne on my dime. I had 48 hours. No, less. I had until noon tomorrow. Midway through Thursday, while the house was quiet and Jessica was in the backyard on a call, I made my move. I threw the covers off. The pain in my hip was blinding, a white-hot spike that nearly made me black out. I bit my lip until I tasted blood to keep from screaming. I rolled out of bed. I hit the floor on my hands and knees. I crawled. I dragged myself across the carpet, inch by agonizing inch, towards the closet. My breath came in ragged gasps. I was a soldier again, crawling through the mud, fueled by the sheer refusal to die. I reached the closet door. I pulled it open. Inside were boxes of my old clothes, things Jessica deemed too ugly to donate. I dug through them, my hands shaking. I found it. My old charcoal suit jacket, the one I wore to my wife's funeral. I hadn't worn it since. I patted the pockets. Nothing. I checked the inside breast pocket. Nothing. Panic flared. Had I removed it? Had Jessica checked the pockets? Then, my fingers brushed a small lump in the lining, a tear in the fabric. I reached inside the silk lining itself. My fingers closed around cold plastic. I pulled it out, a small, prepaid burner phone. I had bought it 3 years ago for emergency roadside assistance and forgotten about it. It had slipped through the hole in the pocket. I pressed the power button. The screen flickered to life. 10% battery. It was enough. I dialed the number written on my bandage. My fingers felt clumsy, thick. Ring, ring, Elena. I whispered. My voice was raspy, unused. Mister. Her voice was shaky, hushed. Oh my God, I filed a report with Adult Protective Services, but they said it takes 72 hours for an inquiry. They said without proof of immediate danger. I didn't know if you saw the note. I saw it. I rasped. Listen to me closely. They're forcing a signature tomorrow at noon, a deed transfer. I'm calling the police, Elena said instantly. No, I said. Not yet. If the police come now, it's a domestic dispute. It's he said, she said. I need to catch them in the act. I need you here, Elena, tomorrow at 11:55.
Walk in the front door. It won't be locked. I'll make sure the latch is taped. But don't come alone. I need my lawyer, Mr. Sterling. I recited the number from memory, a number I had dialed 1,000 times during my business years. Tell him the Bluebird has landed. He'll know what it means. It's a code we set up years ago for a hostile takeover. Bluebird has landed, Elena repeated. I've got it. Mr. Vance, are you okay? I'm angry, I said. I'll be there, she promised. I hung up. I turned the phone off to save the last sliver of battery. I shoved it deep into the toe of my slipper, hiding it. Then, the hardest part. I crawled back. The journey back to the bed took 10 minutes. Every movement was agony. I hauled myself up by the sheets, sweating, trembling, my heart racing like a trapped bird. I collapsed onto the mattress just as I heard the front door open downstairs. Footsteps on the stairs. I pulled the covers up to my chin. I forced my breathing to slow. I closed my eyes. The doorknob turned. Jessica walked in. She was holding a glass of water and the bowl of applesauce with the blue powder. Time for your vitamins, Dad, she smiled, her voice sickeningly sweet. We want you rested for tomorrow. I looked at her. I looked at the face of the woman who was systematically murdering me. I opened my mouth. Thank you, Jessica, I whispered. I took the poison. I swallowed it this time. I let the sedative slide down my throat because I needed to sleep. I needed to build my strength, and I needed her to believe, completely and utterly, that she had won. The bandage on my hip felt heavy against my skin. It wasn't heavy with injury anymore. It was heavy with the weight of the truth it concealed. Friday was coming, and so was the reckoning.
It was a subtle, psychological dismantling, a way of reinforcing my invalid status, a visual reminder that I was not a man fully dressed for the world, but a patient being managed. She combed my hair with strokes that were too hard, the teeth of the comb scraping against my scalp, talking fast, her words tumbling over each other like stones in a landslide. "It's going to be such a nice day, Dad," she chirped, her eyes darting around the room, checking for dust, checking for imperfections. "We have a visitor coming at noon, Mr. Crooks. He's very nice. We're just updating some paperwork, just standard stuff to make sure your insurance covers more therapy. We want you walking again, don't we?" It was a lie so thin, so transparent, that I could see the greed shining through it like bone pressing through bruised skin. She wasn't updating my insurance. She was liquidating my life. I sat there, letting my head loll slightly to the side, playing the part of the medicated burden she needed me to be. Inside, my heart was a drum beating a war march, but my face remained a mask of slack-jawed confusion. "Walking," I mumbled, slurping slightly. "Garden. Roses need." "Yes, the roses," she said dismissively, buttoning my collar tight enough to choke. "We'll water them later. First we sign." They moved me downstairs at 11:30. The descent was a performance in itself. Daniel took one arm, Jessica the other, treating me like a piece of antique furniture that was heavy and awkward, but valuable enough to be careful with. The dining room was flooded with sunlight, blinding after weeks in the dim purgatory of the guest room. I squinted, letting my eyes adjust to the brightness of the stage they had set. My son, Daniel, couldn't look at me. He was vibrating with nervous energy, his skin pale and clammy. He busied himself with the expensive espresso machine in the corner, his back to the table. I could hear the cups rattling in their saucers as his hand shook. He was a man being eaten alive by his own weakness, a man who knew he was committing a sin but lacked the spine to stop it. He was brewing coffee for his father's executioners. At noon precisely, the doorbell rang. Jessica smoothed her dress, plastered a welcoming smile onto her face, and opened the door. Mr. Crooks walked in. He was a man who lived up to his name, short, round, with a suit that looked expensive but fit poorly, and eyes that assessed the value of everything they touched.
He carried a leather briefcase that looked heavy enough to bury a man. "This must be Arthur," Crooks said, his voice oily and rich, walking over to where I sat slumped at the head of the table. He didn't offer to shake my hand. He looked at me like I was a signature dispensing machine. "Hi, Dad," Jessica said, her voice raising an octave. "Mr. Crooks is here to help us." Daniel brought the tray over, setting it down with a clatter. He took the seat furthest from me, staring intently at the steam rising from his mug. "Just a few signatures today, Arthur," Crooks said, opening his briefcase and pulling out a stack of documents 3 inches thick. He spread them out on the mahogany table, the table where we used to have Thanksgiving dinners, the table where I taught Daniel to play chess. Standard boilerplate stuff. He uncapped a heavy, expensive fountain pen and placed it near my right hand. "Martha?" I asked, forcing my voice to sound thin, reedy, and confused. I looked around the room with wide, bewildered eyes. The room went silent. Martha, my wife, had been dead for 5 years. "Martha is dead, Dad," Jessica snapped, her patience fraying instantly at the edges. She realized her mistake and softened her tone, reaching out to pat my hand with a touch that felt like ice. "Mom is gone, remember? We talked about this. This trust is to protect you. It puts the house in our name so we can manage the bills. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." She pointed to the line, Grantor's signature. I looked at the paper. The text swam before my eyes, not because I couldn't read it, but because the sheer audacity of it made me dizzy. It was a quitclaim deed. It transferred the title of my home, the home I built with my own hands in 1978, the home I paid off with sweat and overtime, to Daniel and Jessica, for the sum of $1. $1. That was the price they had put on my legacy. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the sugar bowl. "Daniel?" I whispered. He flinched. "Do I?" "It's for the best, Dad," he choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears and cowardice. "Please." I hesitated. I let the silence stretch, tight as a piano wire. I picked up the pen. It felt heavy in my hand, a weapon I could use to slit my own throat. I hovered the nib over the paper. Jessica held her breath. Crooks leaned forward, his eyes hungry.
started, then let the pen drop. It clattered loudly on the mahogany surface, rolling toward the edge. I'm thirsty.
My mouth is dry. The pills. Sign first, then water, Jessica whispered, leaning down so her face was inches from mine. Her perfume was overpowering. Her nails dug into my shoulder, painful and sharp. Don't be difficult, Arthur. No, I said, slurring the word slightly. Water. Jessica huffed, a sound of pure, unadulterated frustration. She stomped to the kitchen, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. She returned 10 seconds later with a tall glass of ice water. Here, she said, shoving it toward me. Drink. I took the glass with a trembling hand. I lifted it to my lips. The condensation was cold against my fingers. I took a small sip, letting the water coat my throat. I looked at Jessica over the rim of the glass. I looked at the cruelty etched into the lines around her mouth. I looked at the woman who had crushed sedatives into my food for weeks. And then I stopped trembling. With a surge of strength I had been hoarding for 3 days, channeling every ounce of rage and betrayal into my right arm, I threw the water. It wasn't a violent splash. It was a baptism of shock. The entire contents of the glass hit Jessica square in the face. She gasped, stumbling back, blindingly wiping her eyes as the ice cubes skittered across the floor, and the water dripped from her chin onto the fraudulent documents. Crooks, shouted, jumping up as water splattered his suit. The room froze. Jessica stood there, mascara running, shock turning rapidly to fury. I don't think I'll sign today, I said. My voice wasn't weak anymore. It wasn't the reedy whisper of the invalid they thought they had broken. It was the baritone of the man who ran a trade union for 30 years. It was clear, steady, and dangerously calm. Crooks demanded, looking between me and Jessica. Is he lucid? Jessica shrieked, wiping water from her face, her eyes wild. He's losing it! Daniel, grab his hand! Put the pen in his hand! Daniel stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. He looked at his wife, then at me. He was crying, tears streaming down his face, mixing with the sweat of his guilt. Dad, please, he begged, stepping toward me. We need this. The bank, the loans. You lost everything the day you let her crush pills into my applesauce, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The words hit him harder than a fist. I locked eyes with my son, and for the first time in months, he truly saw me. He didn't see a burden. He saw his father. And the shame of it crumpled him. Jessica! Screamed, grabbing my wrist with a grip like iron. At that exact moment, the front door burst open. It wasn't locked. I had unlatched the deadbolt and put a piece of clear tape over the latch mechanism during my agonizing shuffle to the dining room 10 minutes ago. Elena walked in. She wasn't wearing her scrubs. She was wearing a sensible coat and a look of fierce determination. But she wasn't alone. Flanking her was Mr. Sterling, my attorney of 40 years, a man who looked like a bulldog in a 3-piece suit. Behind them stood 2 uniformed police officers, their hands resting on their belts. "Nobody move," Sterling barked. His voice filled the room with the absolute, unquestionable authority of the law. Jessica froze. She was still gripping my wrist, water dripping from her hair, her face a mask of confusion and terror. "Who are these people? Who let you in?" "It's not your house, Jessica," I said. I pulled my wrist from her grip. I placed my hands on the table and pushed myself up. I winced as my hip flared with a white-hot spike of pain, but I ignored it. I stood tall. I didn't reach for the cane. I stood on my own 2 feet, looking down at the woman who had tried to bury me. I reached down to the waistband of my pajama bottoms. The officers stepped forward, sensing the shift in the room's energy. "Officers," I said, turning to face them. "I'm Arthur Vance." I ripped the tape of the bandage on my hip. The sound was sharp, tearing through the silence of the room like fabric ripping. I peeled back the sterile gauze, exposing the skin beneath. There, stark against my pale flesh, preserved by the bandage Elena had applied 3 days ago, was the ink. It was slightly smudged from sweat, but the message was unmistakable. "Help. 555-0192. The nurse wrote this, I said, pointing to Elena, who stood by the door, her hands clasped in prayer, because she saw what they were doing. I rolled up the sleeves of my white shirt. I held out my arms. The finger-shaped hematomas on my forearms, dark purple and yellow bruises from where Jessica had manhandled me, grabbed me, and forced me into bed, were visible to everyone. She saw the marks, I continued, my voice shaking with the release of the truth. And for the last 3 days, I haven't taken their pills.
I reached into the pocket of my pajama bottoms and pulled out a crumpled tissue bundle. I placed it on the table next to the unsigned deed.
I opened it carefully. Toxicology will prove it's a heavy sedative, Sterling said, stepping forward to collect the tissue in an evidence bag he pulled from his pocket. Benzodiazepines, most likely. Prescribed to you, Jessica, for anxiety. Jessica collapsed into the chair behind her. It wasn't a graceful fall, her legs simply gave out. The fight drained out of her as the reality of the situation crashed down. She looked at the police, then at Crooks, who was hurriedly shoving papers back into his briefcase, and finally at Daniel. "Daniel, do something," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Tell them—" Daniel turned away from her. He looked at his hands. He was sobbing openly now, his shoulders heaving. "She said it was the only way. You had a choice, son," I said. My voice cracked, the grief finally breaking through the anger. "You always had a choice. You could have asked for help. You could have been honest." The police moved in. They handcuffed Jessica first. She didn't scream, she didn't fight. She just stared at me with pure, unadulterated hatred, her eyes burning holes into my soul. "I hope you rot in this house alone," she hissed as the officer pulled her up. "Better alone than with a viper," I said quietly. Daniel surrendered quietly. He held his hands out for the cuffs like a child who had finally been caught breaking something precious. He wouldn't look at me. The shame was a physical weight on his shoulders, bending him low. Mr. Crooks tried to slip past the officers, claiming he was just a third party, but Sterling blocked his path. "You're an accessory, Crooks." As they led them away, out into the bright afternoon sun and into the back of the waiting cruisers, the house fell silent. The air freshener smell seemed to dissipate with the open door, replaced by the scent of truth, which is harsh, clean, and cold. Elena walked over to me. She didn't say anything at first. She just opened her bag, took out a fresh bandage, and gently, professionally, reapplied the dressing to my hip. Her hands were warm. "Thank you," I whispered, looking down at her. "You saved yourself, Arthur," she said softly, taping the gauze down. Mr. Sterling gathered the unsigned papers from the table. The deed, the power of attorney, the lies. He shoved them into his own briefcase. "I'll start the eviction proceedings and the restraining orders immediately," Sterling said, his voice gruff with emotion. I looked at the empty doorway where my son had just been taken away in handcuffs. I thought about the chess games. I thought about the bicycle lessons. I thought about the betrayal that had nearly killed me. "Change it," I said. "Leave it all to the nursing scholarship fund at the community college, every cent." I walked to the window. My hip ached with a deep, throbbing rhythm, but I stood there without support. I watched the police cruisers drive away, their lights flashing red and blue against the manicured suburban street. I was alone in my big, empty house. The silence was absolute. My heart broke for the son I had lost, for the family that had crumbled into dust. But as I stood there, feeling the sunlight on my face, I realized I was standing on my own 2 feet, in my own home, breathing air that wasn't poisoned. I had lost my family, but I had kept my soul. And for now, that was enough.